Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sold Separately. Racing wheels and driving games have been with us since pretty much the conception of driving video games. Nothing really revolutionary or different has really changed since the initial steering wheel and pedal setup. However, back in 1998, Namco, the creator of the Ridge Racer series, tried to take a different approach to this standard setup. Their answer was the JogCon. The JogCon was initially released for the PlayStation 1. It featured your standard PS1 buttons, though it also incorporated a rotary-style dial for your steering. This dial is actually force feedback sensitive, making it the first force feedback steering controller available for home consoles. The JogCon was available in two separate packages. It was available by itself, or you could have gotten it with the limited edition R4 package, which you see right here. It came with R4 and the JogCon. Fortunately, there's only two games that work with the JogCon. It wasn't backwards compatible. One of the games was obviously R4, and the other one was actually Ridge Racer 5 for the PS2. So, let's take a look at these games and see how they work with the JogCon. Now, before you dive in and start driving, I highly recommend you go into both R4's and Ridge Racer 5's option menu and access the control options. While you don't have to do this right off the bat, to get the full experience and potential of the controller, you have to pick a setting that's right for you. The rotary dial on the controller can be set to various degrees of control, from 30, 45, 90, 135, and 180 degrees of control. This is all a selection of personal preference, and the higher degree you choose, the more you're going to have to turn the wheel. Going with the higher degrees adds a little bit more realism to the controls. You also have the option to customize your button mapping as well. This again is a fairly important setting to set because you can actually use this controller in two different ways. You can hold the controller like you would a regular PlayStation controller, in which case you would move the rotary dial with your thumbs. Your gas and brake buttons for this setup are located on the shoulder buttons. The other way to set up this joystick is by holding the entire controller with one hand on either of the pad's elongated handles. This in turn frees up your other hand to get a more firm controlled grip on the rotary wheel. In this setup, you can also use your shoulder buttons for your gas and brake. After taking a while to get used to, I actually preferred this setup more. I would also like to note that there are actually a bunch of other ways to map the buttons, but these are basically the main two ways to hold and map the controller. Now the unit itself works and feels pretty much exactly how you think it would just by looking at it. The controls are as responsive as you make them in the settings. And the force feedback, while some will say is a little weak, I felt was adequate. Had they made the force feedback stronger, I think it would have been more difficult to steer. There is also a setting in the options to change the strength of the force feedback in both game menus. Now I want to clear up that this just isn't a vibrating controller. The rotary wheel does give you some counter tension while you're racing, which is pretty damn cool in my opinion. Like I said before, the controls definitely do take a while to get used to, but you get the hang of it fairly quickly. While doing some testing, I found that some cars really aren't good with this controller. The drifting style cars are definitely harder to control with the dial. While I couldn't find any evidence online of there being any difference on how the controller performed between R4 and Ridge Racer 5, I personally thought it worked a little bit better with Ridge Racer 5. This could simply be due to Ridge Racer 5 having better driving mechanics, but I can't say for sure. If anybody knows more about this, definitely let us know. So can I really recommend the JogCon? I do have to admit that Namco took a pretty unique approach on using a spinner-like control for a steering wheel. It actually feels pretty natural. However, with that said, I still prefer an analog controller over the JogCon. But for any Ridge Racer fan or any fan of unique controllers, this is a definitely must-buy. Well, that does it for this episode, and until next time, guys.